Sorry for the delay, everyone. Okay, there we go. We're live on YouTube now. It's worth remembering that you're live on YouTube now. And so the video is being recorded a little bit. Well, it actually helps with the review process. So if you're on YouTube and you missed the first 5 minutes of class because I failed to start the YouTube video, hey, the good news is we're just talking about last week's session, and you can go back and watch that YouTube video if you need to. So the one thing that we have not reviewed yet is that we were introduced to one or two new characters at the end of chapter 16. 16? Yeah, 16. And they're going to feature heavily in the next few chapters. Do you remember who they are? Ahab in particular, right? Yep. So Ahab becomes king over Israel. And who is his wife? Jezebel. Yep.
Right, yes.
Yep. Jezebel, who is Phoenician. Well, for now, she's from Sidon, which is around, there's Tyre and Sidon in the northwest, just north of Israel, modern day Israel today, as Tyre and Sidon. That's where she's from. That being Phoenician is important to remember. There's all sorts of stuff there. I won't drag it all back out, but between, the the Hiram, king of Tyre, who sends workers down to help Solomon build the temple. So there's an alliance there. And if you remember, there's a lot of stories that are going to take place around that area, not only in the next book, but also in the stories of Jesus, which will have all sorts of parallels here coming up. That'll be fun to talk about. Probably the other thing to remember is just Phoenicia as it relates to some of the gods that we have encountered. And we'll talk about those as we have them, but especially Baal. Baal is an important one for us to talk about. Well, maybe we'll talk about that some today. Okay, anything else you remember or that you found important? Well, okay then. Let's jump into our text. I think that's totally fine. Actually, I prefer it that way today. A lot of what we have been doing is review of the previous weeks before, and when we have these little shifts in the narrative, it almost really doesn't matter if you remember the genealogies that we've covered, or not the genealogies necessarily, but the chronology of the monarchs. That's not that important. What's important is that they're all failures of some sort, and now here we are. Let me get Scott in the room real quick. Sorry. Oh gosh, a lot of people joining late today. Okay. Hello. Oh, so good. So good. Okay. So here we are in 1 Kings 17. We'll start at the first verse. Make sure we're in the New Revised Standard. That's good. Okay. All right. So now Elijah the Tishbite. Finally, we made it to Elijah. Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." The word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Go from here and turn eastward. Hide yourself by the Wadi Kerith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the wadi, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there." So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the Wadi Kerith, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the wadi. But after a while, the wadi dried up because there was no rain in the land. I tell you what, let's stop there for just a second, because the story that comes next is a piece, and I just, let's talk about Elijah for a second if you want to, or if you forgot what a wadi is or something, that's fine. We can talk about whatever you want to, but when I hit the next piece of the narrative, I want to hold it together as a whole. Questions, concerns, comments? Okay. All right. Well, let's get the narrative going. That's good. Okay, verse 8. The word of the Lord came to Elijah, saying, "Go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon in Phoenicia, and live there, for I have commanded a widow there to feed you." So he set out and went to Zarephath. When he came to the gate of the town, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, "Bring me a little water in a vessel so that I may drink." As she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, "Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." But she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of meal in a jar, and a little oil in a jug. I am now gathering a couple of sticks so that I may go home and prepare it for myself and my son, so that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Do not be afraid. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterwards make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of meal will not be emptied and the jug of oil will not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain on the earth." She went and did as Elijah said, so that she as well as he and her household ate for many days. The jar of meal was not emptied, neither did the jug of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. His illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. She then said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." But he said to her, "Give me your son." He took him from her bosom, carried him up into the upper chamber where he was lodging, and laid him on his own bed. He cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I am staying by killing her son?" And then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times. And he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." The Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. The life of the child came into him again, and he revived. Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, and gave him to his mother. Then Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." So the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is true." All right, hopefully a bit of a familiar story, though maybe one you haven't heard in a while, but a good one. So what do you think? What did you notice? What questions? What parallels? Louise.
Yeah, I got a couple of parallels. I'm not being familiar with the Old Testament so much. I think I'm seeing the parallels with Jesus.
Good.
But the first thing I saw was this idea, which shows up in the New Testament, say in feeding the 5,000 or those kinds of stories, where with Yahweh there is no scarcity, even when we think there is scarcity.
Right. That's right.
So no, I don't have enough. I'm ready to die with this last bit. And he just ignores kind of that and says, "Go ahead and make me a little cake and you'll have enough later." So that's a sense of trusting. And I think a broader sense for us that abundance is a constant characteristic of God when we're not worried about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most important things for us to understand about God's character, maybe right next to, actually even a part of, slow to anger, of great kindness, and abounding in steadfast love to the 1,000th generation. That word abundance shows up as a characteristic depiction of God over and over and over again. And Jesus talks about how God came, or he came on God's behalf to give life and to give it abundantly. Things that are related to scarcity, perceptions of scarcity, and things that sort of steal from our perception of abundance are always associated with the enemies of God, so to speak, spiritual or otherwise. And so that's a really good thing to lift out. And then you mentioned the parallel with Jesus. I mean, there are a number of them. It's good for us to remember that the prophet Elijah shows up in the New Testament a whole lot, as a forerunner of the Messiah, or an expectation that Elijah will come and the Messiah will be there. That's kind of how we understand it. And then Jesus does a lot of the things that Elijah did. So So this particular story of the widow of Zarephath, do you recall that coming up? This, I mean, the not a vague allusion, but a very, very specific reference to? Anybody?
Which, the widow, you mean?
Yeah. So Jesus speaks of this story. That's the thing I'm trying to draw us to, and see if anybody remembers that. I see Nancy's hand. What's that?
Was the widow's mite had to do with?
No, it's not the widow's mite in this case. Nancy, you go ahead with whatever you got and pick a movie too.
I brought him today.
Hey, Clay.
Of course, he always is that.
Actually, she framed exactly what I was going to say about a lot of the parables and the references in the New Testament, and how a lot of people referred back to, when they were speaking to Jesus and talking about him, referred back to him saying, "Are you Elijah?"
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. Who do you say that I am? Well, some say that you're Elijah.
Yeah.
A lot of people said he was Elijah. Meanwhile, the person that we're supposed to understand as being Elijah was actually John the Baptist. The Gospels spend a lot of time trying to paint John as the Elijah, so that Jesus can be the Messiah of the house of David. But yeah, that's really good. Very, very good. Scott Simcoe, I saw your hand also.
Yeah, I thought you were asking, where is this widow of Zarephath mentioned in the New Testament? I can't remember exactly where, but Jesus is making the point about, and I think it was Naaman, the other guy who came from Syria to Israel to get bathed and get clean, and that, this is, he was making the point and used this widow story to prove that God just isn't a God of the Jews.
Right. That's right. So
he tells those two stories to make that point.
We get that in particular in his first sermon in Luke chapter 4. Jesus preaches a sermon, and if y'all recall, what he does is he says, he reads from the prophet Isaiah, and then he says, "Today, in your very midst, this scripture has been fulfilled." And then they want to throw him off a cliff ultimately, but it's not because they don't want to throw him off a cliff because he said, "I am here to fulfill the prophet Isaiah's prophecy." They do it because he tells them that in the days of Elijah was sent. All sorts of people are suffering. There's a famine going on, and there is no rain in the land, and so on and so forth. And God sends Elijah to a Phoenician woman, and he saves her. That's extraordinary. So Jesus uses that to say, I'm not just here for you, I'm here for everybody. And they are not having it. They think, if you're not the Messiah for just the Israelites, then we're tossing you off a cliff. And he uses the story of Naaman also, and we'll get to that story too. Very good. Nancy?
I also think about the Good Samaritan also, about how they were enemies at the time, but yet that was the person that reached out. And so
that's good. Very good. And there are probably a couple other things that we should notice, not in terms of parallels, but just things about this story that we should pay attention to. What do you make of the raising of the child to life again? What do you think about that? Good for us to read that here in Holy Week too. All right. Deep thoughts from the crowd. Good.
It has echoes of Lazarus, no?
It does. Yeah. So sometimes we have a tendency to think, resurrection stories are all New Testament stories, and the roots of resurrection stories are found, they start right here. Elijah raises this child. Elisha has a parallel story, and those traditions start to develop and eventually there's a lot of raw material for first century folks to deal with as they're trying to understand Jesus coming to life again. And Jesus himself raises the child of Jairus, and there's all these raising stories, including Lazarus, So it's kind of good to see all those in a certain way of being as being parallel. Properly, we call this a resuscitation story, as we would with a couple of other ones. Not quite resurrection, but close. But really, that's a theological distinction that's not in the text. It's not in the grammar or the words being used. Somebody is down and they are raised again. That's all any of that language actually means. Good. Anything else? All right, we'll jump back in the text. It's really, I don't know, it's also, I would say, good to see the way that the relationship between Elijah and Yahweh is working out. On the one hand, God listening to Elijah, and he becomes this new kind of creation, right? So we have had prophets, but we don't see Eli and Samuel and Nathan doing stuff like Elijah. Elijah is miracle worker, prophet. Just there's something else going on entirely with him, and that's good to see. And it's recognizable to this Phoenician woman, which is, again, important for a number of different reasons. As a parallel, we'll have a Syro-Phoenician woman one day who recognizes Jesus and says, "Oh, you really are the Son of God." Or a man of God, as we have it in this text. Now I know that you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord in your mouth is true. A Phoenician woman, because she is a Gentile, but she recognizes not only Elijah as this almost like avatar of God, but also, like, notice her words in verse 24. The woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of Elohim, and that the word of Yahweh in your mouth is true." She recognizes, like other Gentiles have done before, that this is the deity Yahweh, the personal name of Yahweh. She recognizes that name and understands Yahweh's authority in this place, which she probably didn't understand when she listened to Elijah the first time. But she gets there. Well, maybe she did. I don't know. Maybe I'm misreading that. Verse 12, she says, "As Yahweh your God lives, I have nothing baked." So she already kind of knows the name, doesn't she? Maybe it's worth seeing that as an indication of her ability to be faithful right off the bat. All right. Chapter 18. After many days, which is just, that's the worst. It's the third year of the drought. Luckily, we get that. After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year of the drought. So we should hear that as a long time later in the third year. Go present yourself to Ahab. I will send rain on the earth. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. The famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of the palace. Now Obadiah revered the Lord greatly. When Jezebel was killing off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets, hid them 50 to a cave, and provided them with bread and water. Then Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the wadis. Perhaps we may find grass to keep the horses and the mules alive and not lose some of the animals." So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself. Obadiah went in the other direction by himself. As Obadiah was on the way, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, fell on his face, and said, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" He answered him, "It is I. Go tell your lord that Elijah is here." And he said, "How have I sinned that you would hand your servant over to Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom to which my Lord has not sent to seek you. And when they would say, 'He is not here,' he would require an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. But now you say, 'Go tell your Lord that Elijah is here.' As soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of Yahweh will carry you away, I know not where, so that when I come and tell Ahab and he cannot find you, he'll kill me. Although I, your servant, have revered the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told my Lord what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of Yahweh, how I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets, 50 to a cave, and provided them with bread and water? Yet now you say, go tell your Lord that Elijah is here. He will surely kill me. Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. Let's stop there for just a second because that's fun. There's a whole lot of fun going on here. Let's see if you notice anything, and then I'll draw out a couple things. So we do have telescoped 3 years of famine. Almost without enough information, we hear that Jezebel is killing prophets left and right. Right? And everybody wants to kill Elijah, though we don't know why at this point. Go ahead.
I was just going to say Obadiah seems to already have an inkling of what is going to happen with Elijah eventually.
Yeah.
Which that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So say more about that, though.
Well, just that Elijah is one of the very few people that we don't hear about actually physically dying, but being caught up into heaven.
Right.
And so when he says you could just disappear and I wouldn't know where you went and I would be killed.
Right.
I'm wondering, how does he know that that's a possibility?
Yeah. It ends up being kind of almost like a pun of sorts. So we know, or we're supposed to know, you may not know. Elijah doesn't die. He gets taken away in a chariot of fire, and he doesn't actually die. He just ascends into heaven. Yahweh just whooshes him out. And we are probably supposed to know that as we're reading the beginning of the story. And the assumption would be that all the people who heard this story later on would hear that. But Obadiah doesn't know that. And so there's this sort of like 2-level dramatic irony happening. What Obadiah sees happening is that every single time that Elijah goes somewhere, he's being hunted down, and as soon as they catch him, he's gone. And it's like God's teleporting him. I think he's almost being sarcastic about it, knowing that it's going to cost him his own life, but he's being sarcastic about it. But we see like, oh, yes, that's it. That's exactly what's going to happen. It's wonderful. We get a lot of that in the New Testament, and sometimes don't give credit for the Old Testament for having that kind of that kind of drama to it. Good point. Anything else you notice? There's one other thing about the sort of literary device at play that's kind of fun to see. I wonder if you maybe picked up on it. We saw it back. One of the places where I love seeing it was with Adam and Eve. We saw it with Joseph and Potiphar's wife. All right, I'll end the suspense and tell you. So I just want you to notice. Elijah says, one sentence here, it is I, go tell your Lord that Elijah is here. And then notice, this is the response of Obadiah all the way to verse 15 here. So one line, go tell him, and then Obadiah just starts pouring out words, and all of them uncomfortable. This is one of the ways that we get these windows into the kind of character development as well as the state of a character. And sometimes it's just really fun to see. Like, obviously, he's a nervous wreck. He can't shut up. He's been given one request from somebody who's understood to be kind of like a chief prophet at this point. And he spends the next almost, a quarter of a chapter just blurting stuff out. We all know people like that. Good to see it in Obadiah. Okay, anything else you noticed? Maybe worth mentioning that there is a tradition that this is the Obadiah who writes the book of the prophet Obadiah. It's almost certainly not true, and that's not like a biblical tradition. But it can be kind of confusing. There may be like 6 or 7 or 8 different Obadiahs in the Bible. It's a kind of common name. It means servant of the Lord, basically. Servant of Yah. We'll get our text back up. Keep moving on. All right, so Obadiah goes to meet Ahab. Ahab went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" He answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have forsaken the commandments of Yahweh and followed the Baals. Now, therefore, have all Israel assemble for me at Mount Carmel, with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 450 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." There's so much backstory that we don't have here, but it's just there. So Ahab sent to all the Israelites and assembled the prophets at Mount Carmel, which is up like on the border of Lebanon. Elijah then came near to the people and said, "How long will you go limping with two different opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him." The people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, "I, even I only, am left a prophet of Yahweh. But Baal's prophets number 450. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of Yahweh. The God who answers by fire is indeed God." All the people answered, "Well spoken." Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many. Then call on the name of your God, but put no fire to it." So they took the bull that was given them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, crying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice and no answer. They limped about the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, surely he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he has wandered away, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened." Then they cried aloud, and as was their custom, they cut themselves with swords and lances until the blood gushed out over them. As midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, but there was no voice, no answer, and no response. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me." And all the people came closer to him. First, he repaired the altar of Yahweh that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of Yahweh came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." With the stones, he built an altar in the name of Yahweh. And then he made a trench around the altar, large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. Next, he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. He said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." And then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. Again, he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. We get those 3s every now and then, right? Mm-hmm. So that the water ran all around the altar and filled the trench also with water. At the time of the offering of the oblation, the prophet Elijah came near and said, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you, Yahweh, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." And then the fire of Yahweh fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "Yahweh is indeed God. Yahweh indeed is God." Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape." And they seized them. And Elijah brought them down to the Wadi Kishon and killed them there. Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing rain." So Ahab went up to eat and to drink. Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, and there he bowed himself down on the earth and put his face between his knees. He said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." And he went up and looked, and he said, "There is nothing." And then he said, "Go again 7 times. At the 7th time, he said, "Look, a little cloud no bigger than a person's hand is rising out of the sea." Then he said, "Go say to Ahab, harness your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." In a little while, the heavens grew black with clouds and wind. There was a heavy rain. Ahab rode off and went to Jezreel, but the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. He girded up his loins and ran in front of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Good drama. Good drama. All right, what do you think? No doubt you've heard this story before. Scott?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we haven't learned a thing in 2,500 years. You know,
Yeah.
Moses, same thing, performed hundreds of miracles because they kept not believing, and now Elijah is, the only way they'll believe him is if he performs a miracle.
Yep.
In the New Testament, they do the same thing with Jesus.
Right. And then even when
Show us a sign, show us a sign.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. They ask that all the time. And we do too. I think, your point to draw it back 2,500 years is great. Because we do too. And then when we get a sign, we believe for like a day. Some of us, I'm pointing my finger at myself. Like, oh my gosh, here is Yahweh showing up and look what he's done. And then, a week later, back to the old same stuff. It's hard to hold on to that, right? It's really, really hard to hold on to it. Very good. What else did you see? Nancy or Clay?
Why did he kill the priests from Baal? Why weren't they going to convert?
Yeah, it's a good question. Conversion is almost like not given as an option in most of these stories. They're just too, from the perspective of the narrative, not from my perspective. This is not a theological perspective, but from the perspective of the narrative, they're just too lost. They're too impure. They're too given over to Baal, and they can't convert at some level. I think that we're supposed to understand too, though again, I'm not saying this because I condone it. I think we're supposed to understand though that these are also largely anyway Canaanite or Phoenician priests. The trick with that is that we know from previous chapters that a whole lot of clergy were being ordained, so to speak, out of the Israelites. And so I'm uncomfortable saying it's all of them. But the last thing that I'll say from the narrator's perspective that we just have to hold on to is the narrator hates the northern kingdom. There's just nothing to be redeemed out of the northern kingdom. It needs to be purified and purified by destruction, in the same way that the narrator understands that the land that God gave to the Israelites needed to be purified, and all of it is exaggeration and all of it is hyperbole, but it's also genocidal, and in many, many cases, we are just right to say that's, the Yahweh who's willing to do this incredible miracle. The one that we know in Jesus would also show up and say, hey, what do you think? I just did this incredible miracle. What do you want to stop serving Baal and turn from your sin and live? And we just don't see it in the text. Challenging. Judy, give me 1 second. I'll get the camera over to you.
No, I'm just thinking that tolerance hasn't changed in all these thousands of years.
Yeah.
If you're not on my side, then you're exterminated.
Yeah, that's right. That's oh gosh, we talked about tribalism a couple of different times and ways, but I think it's just good for us to understand that Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, more than probably any other set of books in the Bible, though it's not exclusive to these, are so extraordinarily tribalistic, and tribalism does not allow easily for cooperation with those who are not within the tribe. We have then like the oddity at some level of, well, then why does Elijah go to the widow of Zarephath, who's outside the boundary of the tribe, and perform a miracle for her, and then turn around and not, find a way to bring in the prophets of Baal and Asherah? But at that point, the layers of infraction are just, I really think the narrator cannot conceive that the complicit Baal priest who is a servant of Jezebel and dedicated, just can't conceive of that person as being worth saving at some level. And again, for us, I think it's important for us to say, that's not our understanding, but it is the narrator's. And And so then we say, okay, well, maybe we are really enlightened and we're better than that, which I wouldn't go that far personally, but we look around real quick and we say, where else are there tribes in our lives that cannot tolerate and would be willing to destroy those who are outside the tribe simply because they cannot conceive of a redemptive value among those who are not within the tribe. And you see it every day. Louise, I saw your hand.
I think Andy was first.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see Andy.
Well, ladies first.
Okay. I think there's another way to look at this extermination of the prophets. And I think, at least for my understanding, and trying to figure out what the editor or the writer is trying to tell the people of that time, is that there's a lot of exaggeration, kind of gross exaggeration, which is meant to be like a cautionary tale. So maybe the folks listening to this are also going back to the Deuteronomistic, I'm going to learn how to say that word, but you know.
You got it.
Idea that if you choose to worship Baal, that's the biggest no-no that can happen. So having all of these priests killed is not so much a sign of human against human cruelty, although it was, but I think it was viewed
not
more
for the
like,
narrator.
This is what happens when you don't follow Yahweh. You know, whether
Exactly.
it's
I mean,
literal death or spiritual death or your children die or any of that stuff, I think it's meant to have people say, oh, I better stay in line here.
Yep. Very good. Yeah. This is a Deuteronomistic text is a perfect display of that sort of thing. And remember just a couple of chapters ago, we had that prophet of Yahweh who went north. He shouldn't have gone north, but he was sent north, but he wasn't supposed to eat or drink or be in any way infected with the northern stuff. And he stops and he does, and God makes sure he dies immediately because there's just no tolerance for it. Yahweh cannot tolerate the wickedness of the north, and especially the worship of Baal.
And no excuses either, because that prophet tried once to follow and he was tricked, but no excuses.
No excuses. Yeah. Perfect Deuteronomistic lens. That is this narrator for sure. And remember, when we want to connect that history, that we need to connect it especially to Josiah, who lives after the Assyrians have destroyed the northern kingdom. And so understands that this wickedness that they won't turn away for is the root cause of their destruction and will become the root cause of the destruction of the southern kingdom also. So it gets shared. But that Josiah kind of does this reform again and says, you can't tear down the altar of Yahweh in the north and worship Baal on a side altar and try to pull people out of Jerusalem so that they worship golden calves in Dan. You can't do that and not expect Yahweh to be angry, because Yahweh is the Yahweh who delivered you from the hand of Pharaoh and gift wrapped this thing for you. And look at the offense that you're giving. And, I think you're right, Louise, to step back and say, this isn't about human versus human, though it is at some level. At a deeper level, the narrator wants us to see how incredible the offense is against the perfection of Yahweh. And it's good for us to hold on to that.
Mm.
Okay, Andy, and then Clay.
Yeah, it just struck me that Elijah killed these Baal prophets, whereas Jesus never killed. Elijah was not the son of God. What other differences come out between Elijah and Jesus?
Yeah, we'll see a couple of them, I think. Hold on to that at some level. Jesus is not a direct parallel to Elijah. We think of it, and when we want to think of him as being parallel, we think of it in terms of typology. Elijah developed an archetype of sorts, and Jesus perfects it. And so where we could have a Jesus confronting the powers of the world and calling down fire and destroying, and gosh, there's just so much more about this story that we could look at today if we wanted to. As we look at that, instead, Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. It's when those changes happen, we really are supposed to say, oh, no, Jesus is not just the second coming of Elijah. Look how much different he is. But when we think about John the Baptist, who doesn't resort to violence, but John the Baptist picks up this language and says, fire's going to come down. Look, the axe is already at the root of the tree. Repent, you brood of vipers. So John the Baptist fits the role pretty well. Clay or Nancy?
Didn't they consider Baal to be demonic?
Yeah. Good. So we need to talk about Baal just in general. Not necessarily the monarch in terms of the one sitting on the throne being deified, be Baal, but oh, go ahead.
No, I mean demonic.
Oh, demonic. Oh, so okay. Let's talk about Baal then, and yes and no. So Baal means, as far as we can tell, Lord, which is one of the reasons that I never just want to say Lord when the word Lord shows up, because as you remember, Lord is there to keep us from saying Yahweh, and I'm a rule breaker, so here I go. So Baal is the equivalent in so many ways. It's a different pantheon of gods in Canaanite mythology and Phoenician mythology, but by the time of Elijah, Baal is worshipped in cultic sites all the way into Egypt and throughout the Middle East. And Baal is understood to be like this combination of kind of Zeus and all these other figures. He's the god of fertility and the god of lightning and the god of he's the one who destroyed the sea monster and allowed sailors to sail on the sea and so on and so forth. And he appears as almost like a different deity in every place. So you end up with Baal of this location who has a slightly different epithet or whatever than the Baal in this location, in the same way that that happens with other deities in different mythology, and even with Yahweh, or with El, I should say, with El Shaddai versus Elohim. So you have complexity. I'll start there. And one of the things that is probably true from a social anthropological perspective is that these were competing deities within a henotheistic pantheon of sorts. So there were a lot of deities among people who lived next door to each other. The Israelites, or the Hebrew people, they end up becoming culturally dominant. Yahweh becomes the culturally dominant deity. And prior to that, El, Baal, a lot of these other associated names, they're probably all understood to be basically the same or a little bit different here or there, or just, like that tribe's version of Baal is El. And so as it develops, one of the things that's been important for us to note is that when we think of the worship of Baal or the worship of some of these other deities, we think of it as being 180 degrees in the opposite direction of the God who has revealed God's self to the Israelites or the Hebrew people. And while that might be true in certain senses from a narrative perspective, as far as we can tell from archaeological evidence and so on and so forth, that development's a little bit slower. Instead of seeing it as being 180 degrees opposite always, we should actually see it as being this kind of like slow drift this way. And so what's happening from, say, well, we'll call it 900 to about 580, is that the prophets are trying to push that gap all the way to make sure that we understand Baal and Yahweh have nothing to do with each other. Yahweh is the chief deity. Baal is demonic as a way of talking about it. And so by the time we get past 580, we absolutely start to develop this sense of Baal as not even necessarily a deity. I mean, we move away from henotheism into monotheism, but instead that Baal is some kind of demon that roams around like an agent of Satan, somehow trying to possess people and kill them. In the New Testament, that's the concept in the back of people's minds when they think about Baal. The Lord of the Flies. This is the Lord of the Flies, right? But it's always more complicated than that. But that is where it lands. Probably not where it is at this moment. And gosh, there are, you can read, Ugaritic is the name of the language, but also if you were to type that into Google, I'm sure you could just probably Wikipedia any of this stuff, but Ugarit, Ugarit, and Baal. If you were to read some articles on that, you can actually read the mythological texts that are associated with Baal and Baal's consorts and Baal's victory over, what was it, Yamu and Tiamat and all that kind of, it's great stuff. It's really fun.
Is Melkart another name for Baal?
Melkart?
Yeah.
Not familiar with that.
Huh.
Can you spell it for me?
It's Melkart.
Do you not know that name? Do you know about Melkart?
Well, one of my commentaries is using Melkart in a way that seems to be synonymous with Baal.
Huh.
So, for instance, it says that what's clear is that by the agency of Elijah, Melkart worship suffered a mortal blow. Many of the prophets were massacred, and Yahweh was reinstated as Israel's God.
Oh, interesting. So, just looking it up, Melkart was understood to be Baal, but the Baal of Tyre. And so, if these are Phoenicians coming over, if they're all Phoenicians, then probably when they think of Baal, they might have used that name.
Okay.
That's interesting. Very interesting. I'm going to read a lot more about that later. I won't make you watch me read about that right now. But I will say that like that, though, again, everywhere where there is a cultic site of Baal, there is very likely a different name of some sort, an epithet for Baal. And the Bible authors rarely understand how to distinguish them. So I wonder if that word ever shows up in the Bible itself, or whether or not the commentator is just drawing a conclusion based on association with the territory. Good stuff, though. Okay, anything else? I do want to just draw you back to the narrative for a second to just help you to see some of the drama. And I won't do it all, but you got to remember, it's been years of drought, right? Years of drought. So like the wood that they're placing on these altars, that's some dry wood. It is ready to catch fire. There's no question about that. For Elijah to fill jars of water and fill up a trench and douse this bowl in the wood and everything else over and over and over again is an absolute waste of water. So the demonstration is so much bigger than just like, oh, this one caught on fire and this one didn't. We really need to almost sort of underline and see how dramatic this is. It's really stunning how it plays out. Yeah, go ahead, Luis.
So that confused me from the beginning, the whole idea of how the two sacrifices, one with the water, one with Elijah, one with Baal, and then the praying to the two gods. And that I couldn't understand what that really had to do with the drought, except that it was like Elijah was coming to announce that Yahweh was going to end the drought, and who were the people supposed to believe, right?
Yes.
That it was going to continue and they're all damned, or that Yahweh was coming to rescue.
Yep.
But now I see by what you just said, that when Elijah put the moat of water around his fire, it was total confidence that the rain would come. Otherwise, he's making a terrible situation much, much worse by wasting the water.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, Elijah doesn't doubt any of this for a second. It's a great display of his faith that this is going to work out. Because if this does not work out for him, they're going to throw him on the altar next. And he's done. It really is. It's I and I alone. And than the prophet of Yahweh who has come to do this, which is just extraordinary. It really is, yeah.
If you did this as a dramatic, as a play, you could hear the people oohing and eyeing and being horrified by the fact that the water was being placed around the fire.
Yeah, good, exactly, right? So you got 950 prophets around there, 900 prophets, and you've got all these crowds of people, and they're just, they hate Elijah already. So boo, hiss the whole time, and then he fills up these water jugs and is wasting the water that is their life, and just, oh gosh. And then as the drama unfolds, they're cutting themselves open to pour blood as a sacrifice to Baal and all this sort of stuff. Just, oh my goodness, it's an extraordinary drama that really, it comes across, but it almost needs to be acted out someday for us to understand entirely what's going on. Good. All right, let's see. We have 4 minutes. Let's see. Let's just go ahead a little bit into chapter 19. Please feel free to come back to 18 anytime you want to and take a look at the other pieces. It's good for us to move ahead. We've only got about 5 more chapters left, so we can be done with this in the next couple of weeks. It'd be wonderful. Oh. Okay, Ahab, verse 1 of chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. He has gone home to his dear wife and said, let me tell you about my day. How he killed all the prophets with the sword. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. And he was afraid, and he got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the broom tree and he fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, get up and eat. He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of Yahweh came a second time, touched him and said, get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you. He got up and he ate and drank, and then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and he spent the night there. Okay, I'm going to stop there because the next scene is so very good for us, and we won't have time to talk about it at any length of what it deserves. You can read ahead a little bit if you want to. But what did you see in that kind of opening paragraph that you thought was important? Jacqueline, I think I saw your hand fly up. You're muted. If you'll unmute yourself.
There we go. Well, the reference of the 40 days and 40 nights, that struck me.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
40 days, 40 nights in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Yep. Very, very familiar. And an angel is attending to him.
Yeah, the angel was looking after him. Then he went into a cave.
Yep.
Do I have the understanding that it was after the 40 day and 40 nights that he went into this cave?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And what's difficult to understand is like why all this time.
Yeah.
The convention of 40 days and 40 nights is often used to just say a long enough time for everything to be done. And that's one of the ways that I do it as a shorthand. So at the end of this, Elijah is a different person, and he's about to have an encounter with Yahweh that will set the course of his life next. Yeah, very good. Nancy or Clay?
And once again, the angels attended, like did in the New Testament when Jesus left John the Baptist after being baptized, and here we got another repeat.
Yep, good. It's so helpful for us to see and understand that this material in Jesus' story is connecting to all of this rich material that's been around for 1,000 years prior to him. And so over and over again, we are to understand, and we don't read the Old Testament in the same way that this is just regular old scripture for the people that Jesus was preaching to. When Jesus did something like that, or when Matthew tells the story, or Mark tells the story, or Luke tells the story, people really are. It's like, oh gosh, I can't imagine what the best movie reference is here. But I'll tell you the one that's most fun for me. My kids and I are watching all of the Marvel movies in order again, and there are like 22 of them. Oh. And at movie 22, they are making line by line references to movie number 1 from 10 years ago and 40 hours of movies earlier. That's the kind of stuff and when it happens, it lands for the person who's read all the stories, it lands so well that it's like the scales falling off your eyes. That's supposed to be happening with us as we hear the story of Jesus going to the wilderness. We're supposed to all at once understand Elijah and Moses and the Israelites going into the wilderness, coming out of the water of baptism, coming out of the water of the Red Sea, going into the wilderness, and then what happens on the other side. All that kind of stuff. It's all supposed to be so rich for us. And so it's really great for us to see that now. And if you ever wonder why we're supposed to be so passionate about reading the Old Testament, that's a classic example. Well done, everyone.
Sometimes I think that you can't appreciate the Old Testament until after you've read the New Testament. And then look retrospect and go, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, when people often come to me and say, I'm going to read the Bible for the first time, where should I start? I never say Genesis. I usually will say, start with Mark, start with Luke, start with John, start somewhere there. Don't start with Matthew. Let's read a little bit there, and then we'll come back and do Genesis and start over again. You gotta, from my perspective, and as a Christian, you can expect this from me. When you know Jesus and you go back and you read the Old Testament, it's an entirely different experience.
Yeah, it becomes really, really in your face obvious sometimes when you see that. Like when we're reading at the forum, we have the two. Sometimes reading the New Testament before the Old Testament it gives us the ability to have that hindsight.
That's great. Yeah, very good. That's a really good thing to notice. Very, very good. And, let's give some credit to the editors in the same way that there are editors of the Old Testament who put all this in a specific order. It's not like Matthew, Mark, or Luke, for instance, and especially not John. It's not like they didn't know what they were doing when they were crafting the stories and the way that they crafted the stories. They were trying to get us to see these things in the way that they saw them. So they did a good job of making those references pop out for us. Okay, I saw Andy's hand, and then we got to wrap up.
Yeah, just quickly, I'd like it to be noted that stopping with us with Elijah in the cave is your best tease ever.
Good.
As much as I anticipate Easter Sunday, I can't wait for next Wednesday's Bible.
Yeah,
thank you.
Same here. It is one of the most beautiful stories for us to reflect on, and one of the I don't know. I'm sure you're thinking about this too, Andy. Read it if you want to ahead of time. I'll just say for me, and maybe for a couple of y'all, it's one of the most foundational stories in an understanding discernment and understanding God's voice and understanding the events happening around me in the middle of what was going on with my life and my fear, my anxiety, all the stuff. It's just so good. It's so good. So we'll pick back up next Wednesday. Happy rest of your Holy Week. And we're turning to the parts now that even when they're hard, they are happy. It's Good Friday. It's Maundy Thursday, and we remember the mandate of love. And then we turn toward the resurrection. So I'm glad we can walk that journey together. And I'll go ahead and say Happy Easter to you. We'll save the A word for next week, but we'll say Happy Easter right now. And YouTube folks, God bless you. Hope you have a good rest of your Holy Week. I'm going to